I was, of course, not in the government. I was still teaching at Georgetown at the time. And I certainly didn't think in the summer of 2007 we were going to have the financial crisis that we had. But it became pretty apparent, not only, obviously only to me, that the implosion of some of the money market funds and the disclosure of the amount of subprime mortgages, securitized mortgages on the sheets of balance sheets of a lot of corporations did suggest that there was going to be a major, major correction. And so it was really from that time that I was a little on edge. And obviously, like all of you, everybody, it was over the winter and into the early spring of 2008 that it became clear that this was not just going to be a significant correction.
Was there a moment when you thought, oh, my gosh, this is uncharted territory?
There was. There actually was, and that was in August of 2007. And I remember I was sitting in the quad at Georgetown Law School before the students were back. One of those Washington days that's going to be 95, but at 8 in the morning is pretty pleasant. And I was sitting there reading the Financial Times about a couple of those money market funds, and it was just like a little switch going, where one went from saying, "Gee, this is kind of interesting," to saying, this really looks like it's something that's going to be more of a problem for a broad range of financial institutions. But again, I want to emphasize, in August of 2007, I did not think we were going to see anything like what we saw in September of 2008.
Dan, you were responsible for putting in place a lot of the regulatory reform to try and prevent something like this from happening again. We have seen the rollback of some of that legislation. What do you think about what's changed, and how prepared do you think we are to keep something like this from taking place?
Sure. Well, probably should divide it, Becky, into a few categories. First, with respect to the largest financial institutions, they're obviously substantially safer than they were 10, 12 years ago. Capital levels are up. Their funding is much more stable than it was. Their risk management is immeasurably better than it was. Those gains, though, of course, are not locked in for eternity. They requires vigilance on the part of the regulators and the supervisors. I would say to date, the changes have mostly, though not all, been directed towards smaller banks, and there's ample room for relaxation on smaller banks, by which I mean the mid-sized regionals, too, the 10, 20, 40, $50 billion banks. Mm-hmm. Second category is how well prepared are we for whatever may happen next. And as everyone says, and I think it's true, it's very unlikely that we're going to have a financial dislocation or crisis because of subprime mortgages. It's going to be from some other source. And really, Becky, the Dodd-Frank Act and associated regulations didn't do much to address the shadow banking sector, except insofar as the big banks had been involved with it. And then third, the theme that Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke keep striking, once we do face the situation in which we're in, a crisis or a near crisis, the tools for response are perhaps not as wide-ranging as we'd like them to be.